The other concept that we need to work on in this first section is being able to graph a function. So I have 3 examples on the screen. We're going to walk through graphing each of those 3 examples. We're going to do this by doing a table of values. And so I have a table of values at the bottom here that we're going to fill in, and then we're going to plot our points. So we're going to start with the first function, part A, f of x is equal to 3x plus 4. We're going to pick 3 x values. You can choose whatever you want, but my recommendation would be that you always choose 0, simply because it's easy to plug in, that you always choose a positive number. I'm going to go with 2 in this case, and that you always choose a negative number. So I'm going to go with -2. It doesn't matter what numbers you choose, but choosing a negative, a positive, and 0 will give you a pretty good spread for your graph. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my function and I'm going to plug these numbers in. So the first thing that I'm going to be looking at is an x value of 0. So if I plug a 0 in right here for this x, then I'm going to have 3 times 0 plus 4. Okay, and we know that 3 times 0 is going to stay 0, and then we're going to add 4. So 0 plus 4 is going to give me a 4. So now that I have that first point, I'm going to go ahead to my graph and I'm going to plot that point 0, 4. So remember that your x value tells you how far from the left and the right you want to go, and the y value tells you how far up and down you want to go. So a value of 0, 4 means that you're going to start at the origin, you're going to go to the left or to the right 0, and then you're going to go up 4 because it's positive. So I'm going to place a point right here on 0, 4. Okay, so now I want you to go ahead and do the same thing for the 2 and the -2. So go ahead and plug the 2 into your function and also the -2 into your function, and let's see what you get. So plugging the 2 in should give you 3 times 2 is 6, plus 4 gives you 10. All right, so let's plot that point. So starting at the origin, we're going to go over 2 because that's our x value, and then up 10. And we'll place our point there. All right, now plug in the -2. So 3 times -2 is -6, plus 4 is going to give you a -2. All right, so let's plot that one. So again, we start at the origin. Our x value is -2, so we go to the left, -2. And our y value is also -2, so we come down -2. Now, the hint that I can give you is that the only graphs that we're going to be looking at are either lines or parabolas. And if you remember, a parabola is like a U-shaped graph. So once you get the 3 points, you want to ask yourself, does this look like it's going to be a straight line, or does it look like it's going to be that U-shaped parabola? And then you're going to connect, okay? So we're going to go ahead and connect these 3 points, and that should make a line. We put an arrow on the end of each end of the line, then that just simply says that that line continues on in both directions. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to part B. Our function is f of x is equal to 2/5 x minus 9. Okay, so I'm going to change my values a little bit here. If I can get them to change. All right, so the reason that I'm changing them is because I know that if I plug a 2 in, it's going to end up giving me a decimal value to plot, and I think that's going to be difficult. So I'm going to leave 0 in as my first option, and then I'm going to choose some multiples of 5 because 5 is my denominator. So I think I'm going to use 5, and then I'm going to use negative 5 for my 3x values. Again, there's nothing important or particular about the ones you pick. You just want to pick some that are relatively easy to plug in. All right, so let's look at our function. Our function is 2/5. And then we're going to be plugging in our x value into that set of parentheses and then subtracting 9. All right, so my first x value to get plugged in is 0, which is going to cause this entire first part to turn to 0. So we're going to have 0 minus 9. So that is going to give me a negative 9 for my first value. All right, let's plot that point. So again, start at the origin. You're going to go left and right 0, so we're not really going to move there. And then we're going to go down negative 9 on the y, and we'll put a point there. All right, so now let's plug in a 5. So if we plug in the 5, what's going to end up happening is that this 5 and this 5 are going to cancel out, leaving me just the 2. So 2 minus 9 is negative 7, and so we'll plot that as our next point. So starting at the origin, our x value is 5, so we're going to go to the 5, and then we're going to go down 7. And we're going to place our point right there. Right. All right, so our next one is to plug in a negative 5. And again, we're going to see kind of the same thing happening. We're going to see this 5 and this 5 canceling out, and that's going to leave you a negative 2. Negative 2 minus 9 is going to give you negative 11. Negative 11. All right, so let's plot that one. So we're going to go to negative 5 on the x-axis, and then we're going to go down to negative 11, which is just a little bit off the graph. I'm just going to go ahead and drop down what looks like maybe one more and put it right here. All right, now again, your options are you're going to either be graphing lines or parabolas. This also looks like a line, so I'm going to come in and connect those 3 dots, putting an arrow on each end, and I have a picture of my graph. All right, so one more that we're going to look at. All right, and again, I am going to go back to some smaller numbers since this has a squared value in it. I think I'm going to go with 1 and with negative 1. All right, so our function is 3x squared. So I'm going to have the 3. I'm going to be plugging something in for the x and then squaring it. And then it's going to have minus 6. And again, we're going to be plugging something in for that other x. All right, so the first thing that we're going to plug in is going to be 0. So 0 is going to go in both sets of parentheses. And when we do that, the entire thing is going to cancel out, correct? I mean, 3 times 0 is 0, 6 times 0 is 0. So that first point is at 0, 0, sitting right at the origin of this graph. All right, so let's move on and let's do an x value of 1. So I'm going to put my 1 in right here and also right here. So remember that you're doing exponents first. So 1 squared is still going to be 1. So this is going to be 3 times 1. And we'll leave the rest of it as it is, 6 times 1. We do our multiplication. 3 times 1 is 3. 6 times 1 is 6. And we do our subtraction, and that's going to give me a negative 3. All right, so let's plot that point. So I'm going to go over to 1 and down to negative 3, and I'm going to place my point there. All right, one more. So the next one is that we're going to plug in a negative 1. So I'm just going to put the negative in there, and let's look at what happens in that case. All right, negative 1 squared is still going to be positive 1, so that part's going to stay the same. All right, so let's see what we end up with here when we do this. All right, so 3 times 1 is 3, and a negative 6 times a negative 1 is a positive 6. So 3 plus 6 is going to give me 9. All right, so our last point is negative 1, positive 9. Now I can see that this is not a straight line. It's starting to curve just a little bit. I think I'm going to need to do maybe one more point on this just to kind of get a feel for where things are at. So I think I'm going to add one more point in this because I'm not exactly sure what this thing is going to look like. And you may have to do that. So I think I'm going to add maybe I'll add a 2. Let's see what happens at 2. All right, so I'm going to put a 2 in for the x. All right, so 2 squared is going to be 4. And we'll have a 2 right here. All right, so 3 times 4 is 12. And 6 times 2 is also 12. All right, so this last point, which I don't really have room in my table to put it, to do that. All right, so my last point is going to be all right, so 12 minus 12 is 0. So we have a point at 2, 0. All right, so now we can see the graph sort of curving back up. All right, so let's go ahead and draw it in as a parabola. Come down through that point and then start to head back up. All right, so something along those lines. So just realize that as you're drawing this, if you know that it's going to be a parabola, you may need to add another point so that you can see what's happening as you come up on that other side.